Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am your Al Sports Alpha Leonardo Velasquez. I hope you are all having an amazing Friday and are looking forward to all the sporting events that will be occurring this weekend, which includes the Australian Open and the NFL playoffs. I'm excited for them and I'm going to be watching them all weekend. It will be something for us to talk about next week. In today's video, I want to be covering a topic that has risen a lot of red flags and also some headlines over the last few days, which involves Jaylen Brown, the Boston Celtics, and the San Antonio Spurs. So, most recently, a few days ago, after last Saturday's match between the Celtics and the Spurs at TD Garden, Jaylen Brown received a $35,000 fine for his criticism of the officials for only allowing the Celtics to have a total of 4 free throws in the game compared to San Antonio Spurs' 20 free throws in the game. And it raises the question, does Jaylen Brown have a valid argument for criticizing the officials? And it does seem like he does, because this is something that, I think a lot of people could have noticed over the last, month and a half when it comes down to the San Antonio Spurs playing some big games. I wrote down some notable games and looked at the comparisons of free throws for both teams in that specific game. And I did find some interesting, statistics about some of like the free throw comparison to how the Spurs were receiving a good amount of free throws compared to their opponents on that specific day. Some notable games were on December 10th in the NBA Cup between the Spurs and the Lakers. The Spurs had a total of 36 free throws while the Lakers only had 23 free throws. And on December 23rd against the Thunder, the Spurs had a total of 24 free throws and the Thunder only had 7 free throws. And on New Year's Eve, the Spurs had a total of 40 free throws, and the Knicks only had 20 free throws. And now, most notably, with the Celtics on January 10th, the Spurs had a total of 20 free throws, while the Celtics only saw 4 free throws. And to most to most note that it saw the Spurs take away the wins in all 4 of these games. And these are notable opponents. You have the Lakers, who are, up there in the West. Obviously, they've been taking some defensive struggles lately, but they're still a team that can probably push for a playoff spot when the time comes in April. But, the New York Knicks are one of the leading teams in the East, as the Celtics are as well. And these are top opponents that, people will watch these games. They will, like find a way to like really like get their hands on them and try to analyze like which team is going well in the right direction. So the Thunder, obviously, they're kind of trying to reassert themselves after a two game losing streak. So I believe that when we look at these statistics about how the Spurs have had some favorable free throws, compared to other teams that they faced, it does raise the question, is the league trying to help the Spurs, win some games that should be closer than they really are if they are not getting these favorable free throws? So, in my opinion, I do think that this like raises a very questionable, topic, considering that it's a big difference. 36 compared to 23, 24 compared to only 7, 40 free throws compared to 20, and 20 free throws compared to only 4. So it just does raise a little bit of concern when it comes down to high profile games if the officials are trying to help the Spurs win, because obviously this is not something new. This is not something where people are clueless and don't know what's going on, because we've seen the documentaries about, for example, Tim Donaghy, who was found guilty for having an influence in gambling and affecting games back in the 2000s, as his documentary came out on Netflix with Untold. And he's mentioned how sometimes the league would tell the officials for high profile games to kind of help another team, most notably with the Lakers and the Sacramento Kings in the Western Conference Finals, where the Lakers were helped by a lot by the officials, and it saw the momentum get taken away from the Sacramento Kings. So it does raise a question, is the league trying to help the San Antonio Spurs? We don't know, but it does raise a question. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama, he is a high profile basketball figure. He is from France. He has a good international reach. And it could raise the question, is the league trying to help the Spurs win by growing more revenue and growing more, connections around the world due to Victor Wembanyama's popularity, because he is a fabulous player for his size, for his mobility, his ability to help his team win. A lot of people will tune in to watch that. So it does seem like Jaylen Brown does raise a valid argument, and this is something that people will have to keep an eye on as the season progresses. If the Spurs, when the Spurs play a more notable games, compared to like those teams that they play that most people won't pay attention to. People will pay attention to when they face the Lakers, when they face the Thunder, the New York Knicks, the Celtics, other leading teams, the Denver Nuggets. So it's something that I think a lot of people will keep an eye on, and maybe this is something we can look on in the future if more similar situations arise when it comes down to favoritism of getting more free throws in the game. But it does seem like Jaylen Brown, obviously he didn't care about getting fined. He clearly stated that in his post match interview with the media. He didn't care that he was going to get fined. He just wanted to raise that point that he does think it's despicable how the Celtics were only allowed 4 free throws throughout 4 quarters, which is crazy to think about. Only 4 free throws. Obviously, officials need to call the game, fair, mutually, because it does matter at the end of the day when two high profile teams are playing against each other, when they really trying to see where they are at a certain point in the season. So for sure, this is something that Jaylen Brown does make a good point on, and it is something that personally I will keep an eye on as the season progresses. But overall, I think you know I think this is a questionable thing that a lot of people should keep an eye on. But in the meantime, that is all for today's video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.